Welcome, fellow seekers for truth, and welcome back to my channel, The Kernel of Truth, where we search for the kernels of truth in every philosophy. Today we're going to go over part 1 of Proverbs 2, which is titled The Value of Wisdom. Before we get started, though, I just want to point out that I foolishly wrote my notes in complete sentences instead of bullet points. So if you see me reading my notes, that's why. It's because I'm an idiot. So, without further ado, here we go. Starting in verse 1. My son, if you receive my words and treasure up my commandments with you, making your ear attentive to wisdom and inclining your heart to understanding. So what King Solomon wants us to do is, rather than simply hear words of wisdom or surround ourselves with wisdom or wise people, he wants us to actually receive and treasure up his commandments, he says, in order to gain wisdom for yourself. In a way, this is kind of analogous to owning a dictionary. If you own a dictionary, you have access to, all of the knowledge it contains, just like someone who surrounds themselves with wisdom and wise people has access to wisdom. But you can go a step further than that. Rather than just owning the dictionary, you could read it. Take in the definitions as you need them. Much in the same way that someone who listens to someone who's wise, has the chance to be wise on occasion, in the instance that they're hearing the wisdom. But again, it can go a step further. Rather than just, owning a dictionary or reading a dictionary, you can take the time to memorize what the words in it mean. There's a lot of words, but there's also a lot of wisdom too. And so, in the same way, if you memorize the words that you need and the words that you're likely to come across, then when the time comes that you do come across those words, you'll already know what they'll mean, and you won't need to take the time to look them up. In the same way, someone who takes the time to fully understand and learn a lesson of wisdom when it's taught to them first will have that experience and that memory and the knowledge of what they need to do in the future when they come across that same situation. And the key word in verse 2 here has to be attentive. Since wisdom is a good thing that, to my knowledge, one can never have too much of, it stands to reason that one would want to soak up every bit of wisdom whenever the opportunity arises. And of course, this can only be done if you are being attentive, if you're staying vigilant in watching out for each piece of wisdom that might happen to come your way. Also important here is that when one hears wisdom, it may be contrary to what one thought he knew, or seems difficult to swallow, you might say. Hence, that one must, quote, incline his heart to understanding, end quote. After all, what good would hearing wisdom do, or seeking it out, if upon hearing it, you chose to ignore it because it wasn't what you wanted it to be? So in that way, you have to keep your heart open to understanding so that, if it does happen to be contrary to what you thought you knew, you're ready to accept it, even if it takes a little time to digest, so to speak. Moving on to verses 3 through 5. Yes, if you call out for insight and raise your voice for understanding, if you seek it like silver and search for it as for hidden treasures, then you will understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. So, verses 3 and 4 serve to emphasize the commandments of verses 1 and 2, saying that, if one earnestly and eagerly searches for wisdom, quote, like you seek silver, end quote, it says, like anyone would look for buried treasure that is nearby, then, quote, you will understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God, as revealed in verse 5. So, what Solomon means here is that if one seeks wisdom because they view it as something of great value, or if they call out for it as though, they're trying to find someone who's lost, like children do, say, if they're lost from their parents at Walmart. Then they will not only come to understand wisdom, which I'm calling synonymous to the fear of God, as Solomon does in Proverbs 1, verses 7, they will also know when they have found truth, which I believe to be synonymous here with, quote, the knowledge of God. Going off my notes, so sorry this is long-winded. I'm calling the knowledge of God truth here because, according to Christian theology, God is the one who created the universe, and thereby He also created the order that governs the universe, and all of the aspects of it. He created them. So it stands to reason that the knowledge of God, the Creator, has to be truth, because He is the only one or the creator of something is the only one who could know everything about it. So, there you go. Moving on to verses 6 through 8, it says, "For the Lord gives wisdom, from His mouth comes knowledge and understanding. He stores up sound wisdom for the upright. He is a shield to those who walk in integrity, guarding the paths of justice and watching over the way of His saints." So when the Bible says, for the Lord gives wisdom, since I'm reading this as if from the perspective of someone who may not believe in God, instead of Lord, one could imagine that instead of referencing God here, the Bible is referring to the order that governs the universe. Taking this reference back, if one diligently seeks out the order of the universe, or at least some small aspect of the order that governs the universe, the knowledge that one gleans there will inform him or her on the proper way to conduct oneself, i.e., how to conduct oneself so as to conform to the order that governs that aspect of the universe. Now, from the Lord, or the governing order of the universe, if you will, comes knowledge and understanding, verse 6, and the order of the universe, quote, stores up things for one to learn, verse 7, by virtue of humans existing in the universe and necessarily needing to understand how it works so that they don't die prematurely or, make the wrong choices. Further, verse 7 also states that the order of the universe is, quote, a shield for those who walk in integrity and guarding the paths of justice and watching over the way of its saints, end quote. These are really interesting verses to me because I think that to one degree or another, in many instances, we've all experienced what the Bible is talking about here. And, what they seem to be suggesting to me is that there's something a bit like karma or a sort of natural justice to the universe. Those who partake of the order of the universe, i.e. those who take the time to learn the rules of that order, by following those rules, are then protected by the universe in return because they've done things the way that they're supposed to be done. And I really love this idea, especially because while I'm by no means perfect, I do try to live by the wisdom that I know and have taken to heart, and the proof really is in the pudding. One can almost feel how doing the right thing in the right instance keeps chaos at bay and preserves the order in front of your very eyes. Besides, to me, at least, it just makes sense, like playing in a board game with other people, that following the rules of the game moves as possibilities things that would tend to make the game worse. And the rules to this game also guide you successfully to the end result of the game. Obviously, that analogy can only be taken so far, but I still think that it's quite accurate in portraying the message of these few verses. Before moving on, I do want to re-emphasize the notion here in verse 8 that justice is a natural phenomenon. Things and actions which are in accordance with the order of the universe are just, and those which are discordant from order must also be unjust. Unfortunately, King Solomon doesn't provide, any instance of what is or isn't in accordance with this natural order. He doesn't even provide a way of knowing justice except by the means I mentioned earlier, which is just to know because you've sought it out. In verses 9 and 10, Solomon continues saying, "Then you will understand righteousness and justice and equity, every good path. For wisdom will come into your heart, and knowledge will be pleasant to your soul." The notion that justice and knowledge of righteousness are natural finds further justification here, and that the path to finding justice and the knowledge of righteousness lies in wisdom, i.e., understanding the aspects of the order which governs the universe. Interestingly, Solomon also includes equity here in the gleanings of wisdom, as well as, quote, every good path, end quote. By equity, I have a hard time believing that the Bible here is referring to communism, as some tend to believe, and rather it's referring to the equity of mankind as human beings. As far as I've gathered, wisdom reveals to us mankind's equity by showing us that we are all limited in the same fashion, subjected to the same rules of order, and all equally subjected to the ill effects of chaos. Similar to the analogy of playing a board game, the rules which liken to wisdom show us every good path, end quote, to the end of our lives. All of the good paths which lie in accordance with the order of the universe. Continuing with verse 11 through 15, he says, "Discretion will watch over you, and understanding will guard you, delivering you from the way of evil, from men of perverted speech, who forsake the paths of righteousness to walk in the ways of darkness, who rejoice in doing evil and delight in the perverseness of evil, men whose paths are crooked and who are devious in their ways." When it says, "Discretion will watch over you, understanding will guard you," Solomon isn't bringing anything new to the table like he seemed to earlier with righteousness, justice, and equity. Rather, he's talking about the other byproducts of wisdom, discretion, and understanding. Through wisdom, one understands how an aspect of the order of the universe works, what rules are in place to govern whatever that aspect is, and as a result, will yield the proper course of action when encountering that specific situation or that aspect of the universe. This, knowing the proper course of action, lends itself to discretion, being smart about the choices one makes, in choosing the path one wishes to take through his or her life, to be with order or to go against order. In verse 12, we gather that if one uses his discretion wisely, to follow order, that is, one will be delivered from chaos, or at the very least, the chaos that one would have caused himself. And when advised that the universe operates in some fashion A, when it really operates in fashion B, you will not be deceived and led towards evil or chaos, but will know the truth. Verses 13 through 14 almost serve as a warning against the kinds of people one should avoid. Those who forsake wisdom for ignorance, verse 13. Those who are happy to be ignorant and seem to take joy in doing unwise, chaotic, and disorderly things, verse 14. And also those who intentionally try to deceive others with false wisdom, verse 15. I hope it's obvious why one should avoid these kinds of people, but I guess I'll explain just a little bit, just in case. In essence, the people in verse 13 are anchors to hold you back from your potential. The people who have forsaken wisdom for ignorance. The people in verse 15 are tripwires to make you fall when you don't know the way to go. And in my opinion, Solomon is trying to say that the people in verse 14 are just plain idiots. They know which ways to go, and yet they're intentionally choosing to go another. just bringing this into my own life. There are so many kids in college, which is my age, these days who just don't care if what they're doing is ruining their lives or destroying their potential. And I honestly, I just can't stand it. I don't like to hang out with people like that because, like I said, they're anchors. They're people that try to trip you up by giving you false wisdom, and they're idiots. I, it's astounding, the choices that some people make. Even when they know that something's bad for them. Take drinking and partying and doing drugs, for example. Like the the physiological, psychological, and emotional effects that those actions have on people are well documented, and yet people just want to have fun. They don't really care that they're screwing themselves over for the future, and just it's unbelievable, honestly. So to summarize what we've gone over so far, King Solomon is saying that we have to treasure words of wisdom. We have to seek them out as if they're, something precious to us, something that has great value. That we should take what we learn and apply it to our actions so that we can make better choices in the future. And third, that justice is natural, and things which are in accordance with the way that they're supposed to be are, naturally just, and things that go against that natural order are naturally unjust. And lastly, that following these, words of wisdom that you acquire throughout your life will lead you to the proper course of action. And which, I kind of like doing what's best for me. I don't know about you, but anyway, the choice is yours, I suppose. But stay tuned for part number 2, which will be out soon, in which I will continue with Proverbs 2 and show how Solomon takes this, the value of truth and applies it to a certain example. Like and subscribe and hit the notification bell so that you never miss a new video. Thanks for coming, guys. Have a good one.